Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, comedian, filmmaker, psycho killer. Better. Run away.
Oh, no, it's still going.
Yeah. Guitar. Wang. Go ahead, Josh.
Thanks for singing. I feel like I'm really back at a concert right now. Why is Jason singing? Well, in this season of 1980... Qu'est-ce que c'est, this thing. In this season of Awesome Movie Year, this is what I'm trying to say. We are talking about the films of 1984, and we have arrived now at our documentary episode, and we are talking about the Talking Heads concert film, Stop Making Sense, directed by Jonathan Demme. This is kind of a different sort of pick for us. This is definitely... not a narrative film, but I feel like people don't always think of concert films as documentaries, but that's certainly what this is. And certainly it's an incredibly notable nonfiction film from 1984 and in the concert film genre. And we'll talk more about this, but this is considered by many people to be the best concert film ever made. So we decided to go with that for our documentary pick. Bit of a different approach, but I think it should be fun.
You know, one of the things I like about the show Awesome Movie Year, Josh, is if you look back, we've chosen many different types of documentaries over the seasons. And you're right, concert film is not a straight music documentary or a chronicle of an album, but it is a subgenre of music documentaries. And this one is as influential or as important as any of them. And when we were looking over the documentary options, this was the one that stood out for this year. So you don't have to defend it, buddy. This is a good pick.
I think it is a good pick. I'm just kind of explaining our thought process here. And I will say, I mean, this movie at the time that it was released was treated as a piece of cinema. This is a movie. I think, you know, as time goes on, and we'll talk about this too, especially with more and more home video, there's tons of concert documents, let's say, that are not usually considered to be movies by most people. But this is a film that premiered at the San Francisco International Film Festival. It got a full theatrical release. It was reviewed by film critics, and it was a success at the box office. It grossed $5.1 million on its budget of $1.2 million. It also did win, I thought this was interesting, it won an award for Best Nonfiction Film from the National Society of Film Critics. So at least one critics group included it along with more kind of traditional documentaries. So nowadays, if we get, I mean, obviously theaters are closed at the moment, but when theaters are open, if we get concert films in theaters, it's usually these kind of one night event things and not a traditional release. But this one certainly was traditional.
Right. You're talking about like almost like these live streams up to theaters or, you know, like direct from a theater, a stage theater to the movie theater, so to speak. And one of the other points you made, Josh, is this is a piece of cinema. I think part of the reason that some of these are not considered that anymore are the way they're shot. You know, obviously everyone shoots on digital now, but this was shot on film and, you know, given the quote unquote classic film treatment, other than it was the first documentary to use all digital audio recording techniques.
Right. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why it was so successful and beloved is that you can really hear this concert very, very clearly. And the music is obviously extremely important to a movie like this. And, you know, the way that they were able to record that in as much clarity and detail as a studio album, I think does make a big difference.
Josh, you have made such an important point there. The music is important to a concert film. For those of our listeners, I actually
didn't make an important point, is what you're
who
saying.
Are saying, like, what's an important element of a concert film? The music. That's why, Josh, you've been employed as a film critic for so long.
I am just saying that the clarity of the music is a reason that this movie succeeded.
You're right.
Among
You're
the
right.
top
You're right.
three most important parts, I'd
Yeah.
say.
Well, and also this is a movie where it doesn't have any other elements. And a lot of concert movies, especially sort of concert documentaries that we think of as more as pieces of cinema, include more than just the performance. They have backstage elements, they have interviews, they have things like that. And this movie has none of that. So it really has to rely on the music.
No, you're 100% right. I'm giving you crap, but
Yes.
you're right. And another thing that you mentioned is a lot of the time there will be like reshoots or pickup shoots on sound stages on a lot of these concert films. And Jonathan Demme, the director, wanted to do that, but David Byrne, the lead singer from the Talking Heads and the man who conceptualized this whole thing, refused. So what you're seeing is what took place December 1983, 4 nights, the Pantages Theater. This is that concert put together.
Yes. I mean, as you said, like obviously there were 4 nights, so there is some ability to choose among different takes, so to speak. But yes, this is as a documentary should be, is an actual document of real events that occurred without any fakery, let's say.
Josh, you're on fire today. Documentaries
I know what
document.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I know what documentaries are and what music is. Let's hear from Roger Ebert. Roger Ebert said, "The overwhelming impression throughout Stop Making Sense is of enormous energy, of life being lived at a joyous high. And it's not the frenetic, jangled nerves energy of a rock band that's wired. It's the high spirits and good health we associate with artists like Bruce Springsteen. There are a lot of reasons to see concert films, but the only ones that usually get mentioned are the music and the cinematography. This time, the actual physical impact of the film is just as exhilarating. Instead of the standard phony cutaways to the audience, Jonathan Demme keeps his cameras trained on the stage. And when David Byrne and company use the stage-level lights to create a shadow play behind them, the result is surprisingly more effective than you might imagine. It's a live show with elements of Metropolis." So Ebert obviously thought of this as a real piece of cinema, comparing it to, one of the greatest movies of all time. And of course, I wanted to make sure to get a reference to Bruce Springsteen.
Thanks for that, Josh. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'll just follow up with 2 things. One, on that point, I think Byrne and Springsteen are 2 guys who carefully treated their instrument, their voice, over the years. And that's why they're still having the success that they have and can still sing the way that they can. But 2, Josh, I wanted you to chime in on the point that it has elements of Metropolis. What did you think of that?
I don't know. I think that might be a little bit of a stretch. I do think this movie is cinematic, and I kind of tried to notice that more this time than the first time that I watched it, to think about how this is like constructed as a piece of cinema and not just as like, here's a concert, which is the way that we think of most concert documentaries or concert films now. Because obviously, Roger Ebert was not alone among movie critics in seeing this as a great movie and not just a great concert performance. And so I think maybe Metropolis is stretching it a bit, but I do think Jonathan Demme makes clear choices here from a cinematic perspective.
Yeah, I agree with you. And some of those, I think, in a way, take away, but I can see why at this time they added so much to it. Sometimes you want a little more space. Or one thing that I didn't really get in this film was the interplay between the musicians, and I wanted a little more of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's shooting it in a certain way. And I mean, as far as that interplay goes, I don't know. I think there are moments of that. But then I also wonder if there is just not as much interplay going on and that Demme isn't capturing it because it's not as much there. And I know the Talking Heads, at least related to David Byrne, there was some kind of estrangement between the various members.
Still is.
Right. And so who knows what their personal kind of feelings were at the time. But that's fair. I think maybe Demme shoots it in a way that he focuses on an individual member at any given moment and not always on the whole as they interact.
Yeah, and fair points. I mean, this, like we said, 83. So they were still together for years after this. So it wasn't like we were watching the unraveling of a band on stage. But the counterpoint is this is David Byrne's movie. He is the star of this film.
That he is. Pauline Kael in The New Yorker also was a big fan of this. She said, "Stop Making Sense makes wonderful sense. A concert film by the New York new wave rock band Talking Heads was shot during 3 performances at the Hollywood Pantages Theater in December 1983, and the footage has been put together without interviews and with very few cutaways. The director, Jonathan Demme, offers us a continuous rock experience that keeps building, becoming ever more intense and euphoric. Many different choices could have been made in the shooting and the editing, and maybe some of them might have given the individual numbers, there are 16, more modulation. But in its own terms, Stop Making Sense is close to perfection." And that last line gets quoted a lot.
Right.
Just because even though she's using it actually in a context of being somewhat critical, but I saw that, in a lot of just, pieces about this movie, they say, oh, and Pauline Kael says it's close to perfection.
And she didn't even apologize for liking it this time.
No, she didn't. She seems to go with it, although one wonders how into new wave rock she was. And she's also wrong. Again, like you said earlier, Jason, I think this is 4 performances, not 3, that they shot for this film.
I think so too, but you know what? We're going to let it slide, Pauline. Merry Christmas.
Yeah, she didn't have the internet to research these things at the time.
Yeah, your Wikipedia was doing reporting.
Yeah. But again, these are 2 of these kind of like top film critics at the time, and they really see this as this major piece of cinema. So I found that notable. And they also, both of them talk about this kind of euphoric, joyful feeling that you get from this movie that, I don't know. I could see that happening at the concert in person, but maybe it's just because I'm not a huge fan of this music, but I didn't feel that.
Well, Josh, I am a huge fan of this music, and I didn't feel it either, and I really wanted to. So
right.
I think maybe it was time and place. I don't know. Later in the show, we're going to have a guest, Eric Gladstone, who is a music journalist and author of an upcoming music book, Anything But Nirvana. And he was at these concerts, not at the Pantages, but on this tour. And maybe he can offer us some insight of what we were missing.
Right. I think that is, in general, being present. Here's another obvious observation for you, that being present at the concert is different from watching it in a film.
But that said, we've watched other concert films that have emotionally connected to us better. I think we would both agree.
I would not. I am not a fan of concert films in general. And I've watched other concert films by artists whose music I'm more a fan of, and that maybe I, enjoyed that in the sense that I like listening to the songs more, or I might know the words or something. But in general, concert films leave me cold. So, but we can get to that.
Yeah, it's a different type of genre. I will just quickly say we can get to it later, but I have watched other concert films where I've connected better.
Yeah.
And like I said, I'm a big fan of new wave, 70s punk, Talking Heads stuff. So
Right. And there is, I do want to get a more critical review in here from Paul Atanasio in the Washington Post, who said, "It's a pure performance movie, no interviews or documentary footage, a static composite of long shots and close-ups. Jonathan Demme brought more flair to the big band set pieces of Swing Shift. Visually, we've come to expect more from music. The claws of MTV have sunk into our cortex, so much so that even the lyricism of Martin Scorsese's The Last Waltz now seems flat and ordinary. And the Heads band is so large, 9 members, that Demme's flitting from face to face gets awfully diffuse. As the band jollies around the stage, Stop Making Sense sometimes looks like home movies from a block party." So I think in a way he's getting to your complaint there that there's too many kind of close-ups or individual focus and you don't get a sense of the band as a whole.
Yeah, at the same time, I think there are plenty of bands with multiple members, big bands that have it. And, this idea that The Last Waltz doesn't hold up from a shooting standpoint is like, you're a dumb dummy. That's still to me a pristine document of how a concert film should and could be shot.
Yeah, I have not seen The Last Waltz, so I can't comment on that. But I think the idea here that there's nothing going on visually, again, I think is wrong. I think that Demme is making some clear choices and is obviously thinking about this as a film. And to me, parts of it felt like watching a music video, maybe not as flashy and as fast cut as some 1980s music videos that you might see on MTV or music videos that you might see now. But it felt like there was definitely a construction going on there that had a music video quality. So I don't necessarily agree with him here, but I wanted to get that perspective.
Yeah. Who said that again, Josh? Who was the?
It's Paul Attanasio or Atanasio in the Washington Post.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we know about these Washington Post guys, don't we, Gary Arnold? But no, I do think, yeah, he made clear choices, but some of them, at least now in retrospect, don't hold up the way that maybe the intention was, or at least for me and you, they didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think his choices visually, it's not that they don't hold up. I just feel like they don't necessarily add enough for me to feel like, wow, this is a great movie and not just an effective document of a particular performance. But I want to give him credit. And like I said, watching it this time, I was trying to kind of give him more credit or trying to notice that at least a little.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is, to me, the choices didn't necessarily enhance it, which is what are all like these people are saying.
Right.
And, is it Kreisgau or Christgau? Robert Kreisgau?
I think it's Christgau. Yeah, I know he loved this too. And I wanted to make sure to mainly quote movie critics to emphasize how this was thought of as a movie. But yeah, he was a big fan too.
Right. And he was the senior editor for Village Voice while the music scene was exploding at CBGB and everything. So he was there for the beginning of Talking Heads. And he said this is, the best concert film ever made. So I get it that you wanted mostly film critics on it, but I wanted to at least mention that.
Right. No, that's important. And I think that you can note there that it was the film critics and the music critics who agreed on the greatness of this movie. So, Jason, as a big Talking Heads fan, had you seen this before?
No, I actually hadn't. And I was excited because it's been on my list for so long to watch it, and I've seen plenty, obviously, like music documentaries is one of the things I gravitate towards too. But I've seen, a good number of concert pieces as well. And yeah, I don't know. This one, man, I wanted to like it more. And Josh, I know you had seen it before.
Yeah, I had written a bunch of a series of posts on my site about rock movies a few years ago. And not just concert movies. I think this was actually the only pure concert movie that I wrote about there, in part because it's considered the greatest concert movie ever. And so I wanted to include it. And it definitely at that time left me kind of cold. And I felt the same way mostly this time. But like I said, I think I put in more of an effort this time to try to think about what is going on in this movie cinematically and what is it that makes people think it's so great. And I still didn't get on board with the greatness of this as a movie per se, but I think I maybe took note a little more of it as a film. But yeah, I mean, I'm also not over the moon about this. And again, for me too, a lot of the songs don't really do much for me. I like some of the Talking Heads songs that are more pop oriented, the, kind of the catchy hits that they've had, but a lot of the other stuff doesn't really do much for me. So yeah, I think we're both a little underwhelmed with this.
But I do think it's interesting because we can't say it's because of, we're not fans of this type of music, because clearly I am. And like you said, you're not. So there's got to be some type of intersection that is not translating for us.
Yeah, I think so. And Dave, who is a musician, Dave, had you seen this one?
I had not. No.
And was your experience, did you connect with it a little more maybe than we did?
I feel like I did. I actually did really, really enjoy it. And I've never been the biggest Talking Heads fan. I like you, Josh, I like some of the hits, but, never really got into them very much. But I was very on board. I got really taken in by it.
Well, there you go.
So, Josh, if you're keeping score, you had seen it before, but Dave and I have only seen it once in a lifetime so far.
Oh, no. Thanks for that. On that note, we'll come back in a moment and give our general thoughts on Stop Making Sense. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year in this episode of our season on the films of 1984. We've been talking about our documentary pick, which is Jonathan Demme's concert film, Stop Making Sense. And coming up, we're going to have a special guest who actually experienced these performances or a performance from this tour in person. But as people who did not experience that, I think, Jason, you and I didn't quite get the vibe that we would hope to get from this film.
Yeah, and I don't know, man. I don't know what it is. I watched American Utopia, which was the David Byrne documentary you put out about the touring show that went to Broadway that Spike Lee directed, and I found that like more riveting, and I felt guilty about it. And I'm like, is it the way he shot it? Is it that Byrne and the band are kind of seemingly more in lockstep? Because he's so energetic in Stop Making Sense. Like, that's some of the most thrilling stuff, watching him bound around the stage and dance and just run laps. And construction wise, I totally get it, how, like, you know, we're starting with him and we're adding another band member on each song, and then we're building the stage as it goes. And it's like, but it just, like, I just felt like at any point in time I could have left and come back and it would have been fine.
Yeah, that's fair. I think he does. I mean, I think he's not the only one who has energy. I think they all do. And I mean, that's something in a concert in person that really makes a difference. If you can feel like the band members, that the musicians are all really giving it their all and they're really present, I think that is important. And some of that is all, I mean, that's also important in the film, I think. I mean, you wouldn't want to watch a movie of them all kind of standing stoic and playing their instruments. It'd be kind of boring. But yeah, I don't know. That doesn't necessarily translate. I mean, you can see them, you can see Byrne especially, but I mean, all of them, I think you can see them sweating and you can see them really putting all that effort in, and they're getting the energy back from the audience. Although one of the things this movie does is almost never show you the audience, as one of those reviews mentioned, which I thought was interesting. I feel like a lot of concert films are meant to give you the experience, or attempt to give you the experience of as if you were there in the audience. And maybe it's as if you were in like the front row because you want to be able to see the band members, but it's still that sort of like, let's recreate this experience for you because you are not able to actually be there in person. And this movie, I feel like what Demme does a lot of the time is get rid of that perspective and make it feel like you're on stage with the musicians. And I think that goes in part to what you're talking about the focus on a single band member at a time a lot of the time. And it's like, now we're standing next to this person, or now we're standing next to this person. And I did think that was an interesting choice.
Yeah, it was an interesting choice, but yeah, you're right. Like, you know, we talked about how Byrne said he wouldn't go and do this on a soundstage, and the reason was that he didn't think that they could recreate the energy of a live performance, which I totally get, you know. But yeah, I mentioned The Last Waltz, and you mentioned The Last Waltz, which to me is like maybe the best ever concert documentary. And there's a shot in there. I love the way he shoots it, but like I want to relate it to this movie. There's a shot in there where Garth Hudson he has like the saxophone solo, and Robbie Robertson is in the like side and he's looking at him just in awe. And then Scorsese racks the camera to Robertson on a guitar solo. So you're really getting the interplay and the feeling that these musicians have for each other. And I didn't get any of that here. Like I said, I didn't get any of the interplay, and I didn't get anything beyond that. Hey, we're in a band together, but you didn't get any warmth between the members.
Yeah, that may be true. I mean, I think they seem happy to be there. I mean, individually, they're having a good time.
Right. I'm not saying that. But I'm talking about the interplay between them.
Right. Yeah, there isn't as much of that. I mean, there's little moments where David Byrne goes over to the backup singers and they kind of share the microphone and they sing together, and there's that. But you're right, they're all kind of like in their own little space doing their own little thing, even though it's clearly been rehearsed. I mean, there's the like little dance moments where on the one hand, the dance moves are not sophisticated in any way. I mean, it seems like David Byrne's main dance thing is to look like he's a clumsy guy who's about to fall over.
A wiggle worm or something, or
right.
The blow up guy from the car lot or whatever.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, there's clearly moments where they plan to do certain little moves together. And so there's bits of interplay there. But yeah, and I don't know. I mean, as I mentioned, like this is a band who were known for having some interpersonal conflicts, and who knows what was going on there. And also half the band is kind of hired members who aren't a part of the core band. So, you know, whether they have the same connection with those people as they do with each other, we really don't know.
But that's what you had, literally, that was kind of what I picked up on your last point. You're like, he went over to the background singers to interplay with them. He didn't go over to Tina Weymouth or Chris Franz or anybody or
Right.
Jerry Harrison. So it's like he's almost like connected more to the hired guns than the band here.
And that may be the case. It may be that, David Byrne hired those people and he handpicked them, but he's stuck with his band members. I mean, these are things that we don't know and we can't really know, but they may contribute to that feel. But again, at the same time, I don't think, like you said, I don't think this is a movie where we're witnessing the band like falling apart on stage. Or I've been to concerts in person where I remember going to see Aerosmith one time and you could just tell, I was like, none of these guys want to be here. And that's not the case here, I don't think.
Yeah, that's a different thing. And, Josh, we should say both you and I have written about music probably for at least a decade or thereabouts. You covered a lot of hard rock. I covered a lot of indie rock and new wave stuff like this, mostly live concerts for the Las Vegas Weekly. So I think we both were watching it, or at least I was watching it from both a cinematic and a musical standpoint there.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I hesitate to call myself a music critic sometimes because I don't have the broad palette that is necessary to really be a critic the same way that I feel like I can with film. But certainly I've written a lot of reviews of concerts and of albums. And I think as a concert performance, this is really good. I mean, I'm trying to talk about Jonathan Demme's choices cinematically, but there's also all of David Byrne's choices in terms of the staging. The way they bring one band member up at a time as the show begins, the way it's kind of the stage set is constructed while you're watching the performance. All of that is deliberate choices that David Byrne has made. The lighting, there's a song where he's dancing with a lamp, and there's other moments where the band members themselves are holding spotlights that they move around. I mean, all of those are clever things that David Byrne has put together as part of the staging of the show. And I think, yeah, it's a good concert. I mean, I don't think either of us are saying that it isn't.
No, and I like the set list a lot. So just to go into some more detail, right? He comes out to Psycho Killer and, he says he's going to play a tape on a boombox, but it's from, a soundtrack, a sound machine in the back. And it's just him and Psycho Killer with an acoustic guitar really flailing about. And you're getting that. And then Tina Weymouth comes out to Heaven, and now it's the two of them, and the set gets started to be constructed. And Chris Franz is out, and, he's the drummer. He's coming out to thank you for sending me an angel. Finally, Jerry Harrison is out for Found a Job. So now, like, you're kind of putting this all together, and that's kind of cool the way it's constructed. The song that you mentioned, which is maybe my favorite song in the whole thing, is This Must Be the Place. That's where he's dancing with the lamp. And that's an interesting one to watch, this and American Utopia, because I think that's a highlight of both the pieces.
Yeah, that was, again, as not really a fan of the music, I don't recall like any of the song particularly with the lamp, but that moment is cool and is fun. And yeah, one thing I also noticed, you mentioned at the beginning, he says, I want to play a tape. And that's basically all he ever says. And I noticed There's essentially no stage banter in this movie. I think he says thank you at one point and says a weird thing like, anybody have any questions? And then during the penultimate song, I think he introduces all the band members. But for the most part, there isn't any stage banter. And I don't know if that's something that is like a David Byrne thing and he doesn't do stage banter, or if it's something that Jonathan Demme decided to cut out.
Well, I can't answer that. I can tell you as a writer, that is definitely something I've pointed out as a negative in bands when I see them live. I like how a band can connect to its audience, as long as they're not going on half-hour rants here, like after every song. But so in American Utopia, it's all built as a story, and the songs are connected through different spoken elements between it. So the banter is as much, if the show's 65, 70%, the banter's 30%, but it's all a connective tissue. So I can't say that Byrne doesn't talk to the audience. So yeah, I don't have an answer to that, but you're right. Like it does give you the opinion of like, you're a voyeur of this thing. Even if you're watching super close up next to it, it seems like maybe they don't know you're watching.
Right. And well, I haven't seen American Utopia, but it sounds like maybe that's less stage banter and more like scripted elements of the stage show.
It's scripted into yes, it is scripted, but and then he'll react to what, how the audience reacts. Yes, you're right. But there's definitely more of a warmth to it, I'd say.
Right. I mean, I do wonder also if, if he says something like, thank you, Los Angeles, or it's great to be here in California, or, some typical stage banter thing. I wonder if Demme would want to cut that out simply because you don't want to feel like this is meant to feel universal. It's not the LA performance. It's the performance for everyone. And so that's just speculation on my part, but I wonder if that's part of the reason is that he wants it to feel sort of out of time and not like one performance on a particular day for particular people, but like a sort of Uber Talking Heads performance.
I mean, in a way, you're saying he wanted it to stop making sense.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I don't think he was saying that at all.
No,
okay.
You did a better job with the other one.
Yeah. Leave me alone, guys. So Josh, we don't know. And also it could just be an artist evolves over the years. Maybe he's way more comfortable as an older gentleman talking to the audience than he was as a younger gentleman. We don't know, but that's okay. I mean, I think there's a number of answers to it. Did any song jump out at you like that really kind of hit you on this thing?
I mean, I think the stuff that I liked was the songs that I already knew that I liked. I mean, like I said, the big pop hits are the ones that I kind of enjoy the most. I did like the performance of Once in a Lifetime, which they do in a little kind of a different feel, I think. Am I right about that?
Is that where they're doing the kind of flashlights, almost the Bohemian Rhapsody effect to it?
Well, I meant not visually, but musically, it seemed like it was had a little more of a bass funky feel to it. But I could be wrong about that because again, I don't listen to these songs a lot. But I like that performance musically. I thought that was good, and it was kind of fun to see the Tom Tom Club performance when David Byrne leaves, and Tina Weymouth and Chris France, that was kind of their side project. They do that song, which is a very different sounding kind of, I don't know, funk. R&B disco almost feel, which is the kind of music that they made. And that song, of course, I recognize because it was sampled by Mariah Carey.
Sampled by tons of people.
Right. And that's probably the most famous one, though. But,
yeah.
Because I remember that song.
But Josh, I got to tell you that's Genius of Love you're talking about there. I was so underwhelmed with that performance. I was so bummed out. I think that might have been my least favorite of the actual songs performed. I don't think they got nearly on stage as what they got in the recording of that song. And as opposed to, you want to talk about one of the hits from Talking Heads, like I thought Take Me to the River, which here was done in a much more upbeat version, I thought really translated and popped more on stage.
Oh, see, I guess that was a hit, but I don't think I've ever heard the studio Talking Heads version of that song. I wasn't familiar with it. And that was a song that goes on really long. And I feel like that's the kind of thing where I personally, I don't really care for that in a live concert, even when bands will stretch songs out, and I hate jamming. But I feel like if you're there's a certain energy to something like that you can feel. And that to me is something that really doesn't come across. And that song, and it's towards the end, I think that might be the second to last song. That was maybe the one moment musically where I was like, okay, guys, let's move on. So that was maybe my least favorite song.
Well, there you go. How about you, Dave? Anything stand out for you?
Like I was saying, I don't really know that much of their deeper catalog. So, I mean, for me, it was more just hearing hits. And I actually really thought Burning Down the House was great, just, as a performance.
I like Burning Down the House on this, but I think it's even better in American Utopia, which is what I know. It's like we kind of had this conversation in 16 Candles, although a little differently here. I'm comparing two different things, but I'm comparing two concert pieces of the same artist in a way, although that's David Byrne and this is Talking Heads,
But I think that's fair. I can't imagine that David Byrne and Spike Lee weren't thinking about Stop Making Sense and sort of being under the shadow of it when they made American Utopia.
Sure. And Jonathan Demme gets a special thanks. Obviously, we know he died a few years back, but there is a special thanks for him in American Utopia. Yeah. So I don't know. Interesting stuff. Like What a Day That was from a it's called the Catherine Wheel. It was a Twyla Tharp dance piece, which is kind of a cool thing, you know. So there's a lot of nuggets here, and that one kind of had these shadows that you were talking about, the shadow interplay, and I thought, and vocal harmonies and some good sweaty club shots. The last thing, Josh, that I wanted to talk about was we got to talk about the suit, right?
Of course. Well, I wanted to talk about the suit and clothing in general. But what with the suit first, of course, we're talking about David Byrne's, quote, big suit, which became a trademark for him, and this oversized suit that he comes out in. And it's funny that it became such this huge thing. I mean, huge or important thing, because it's such a minor like thing. It's not like you think of Lady Gaga, for example, or something in these crazy elaborate costumes that she becomes known for. And this is just like a normal suit, but bigger. And something about it really works.
Well, it's the 80s shoulder pad. It's theatrical, you know. Byrne has said like no theater in Japan kind of inspired it. But I think one of the things that works about it is you see him in the suit and then you see him without the jacket, but still in the giant pants. And he's dancing in the giant pants in a regular size shirt. And that's a real visual that sticks in your head.
Right, it does. And I feel like what I wanted to mention, and this maybe goes a bit to the potential tension between the band members that supposedly, and again, this might have been on Wikipedia, so you never know, but supposedly David Byrne requested all the band members to wear these neutral colors. I mean, they're mostly all dressed in kind of grays in order not to take the visual focus away from other elements of the stage show as they're performing.
Lighting and this and that.
Right, exactly. And the shadows, as we've said, are super important to the way this movie looks. And yet Chris France, the drummer, comes out in this ridiculous, like, bright blue polo shirt. And just in general, between that and his haircut, he looks like a high school math teacher or something, which I really enjoyed. But I mean, you got to wonder if David Byrne says, please, guys, everybody, wear some beige or gray or something. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to wear this bright blue shirt. You got to wonder about that.
I don't doubt it. I mean, in American Utopia, they're all dressed in that kind of pale palette, you know, and they all match. So that way you're not focused on it. You're focused on everything around it. So I don't doubt that happened.
Yeah. But I mean, I know certainly for me, like watching this movie, as soon as he came out on stage, my eye was drawn to that shirt. So he accomplished it, I guess. You know, if he was trying to say, screw you, David Byrne, you're not the only one who deserves attention in this band, you know, he managed to do it. So, I think we've covered. I'll be curious to ask Eric when we talk to him in a moment about the difference between seeing this live and seeing it in the film. Because again, I felt like there were so many moments where being on stage with the performers gave you the full effect. And if you weren't there, like literally right in front of it, it wouldn't come across as well. Some of that lighting and shadow stuff that's very subtle. So that to me was interesting. And again, as in terms of looking at what is going on here cinematically, I think the light and the way that they play with that is an important element. So
I agree. I feel like this all should have worked for me, but for some reason it didn't. And I'm sure there are listeners out there who are like, that's because you're an idiot who didn't get it. And fair point, listeners.
Yeah, well, you know, we've had this experience. I'm sure we've been idiots who don't get it in various times. But, you know, we're giving our honest reactions.
For example.
Well, we'll table that one. But, you know, we're giving our honest reactions, and we're, I think, hopefully articulating our own experiences. And that's, that's all we can do. So do we want to rate this out of 5 big suits?
5 giant suits, Josh? Sadly, Josh, I'm only going 2.5 giant suits on this one.
Wow. Even as much as you love the songs, that's all you can.
I love the music, but I was just kind of not with it, my man.
All right. Well, I'm going to give it 3, which I'm surprised to be a higher rating than you, because I am mostly indifferent to the music. But I thought, even if it's not a great movie, I feel like it's clearly a great musical performance and it's documented effectively. So I don't see how I can give it less than 3 stars.
No, I think that's fair. And my question for myself is, can a concert film ever get to 5 stars for me? So maybe it's a 2.5 out of a 4. I don't know. Right. That's something I have to figure out. I gotta, again, Josh, Going to be a lot of soul searching this week.
That's good. That's as long as we can lead to some soul searching, then this show has accomplished its goal. So, Dave, how many big suits do you want to give this?
I'm going with 3.5 big suits.
All right. So
Good.
Dave, the musician, got
Yeah,
it.
I enjoyed it.
I'm glad. I mean, I felt, like I said, I almost feel guilty about just not connecting to it. But hey, that's what it
I
is.
actually really agree with what Jason just said, by the way. Like, I can't picture my favorite concert films giving any of them 5 stars. Like,
Yeah.
it's just hard to imagine.
I agree. And I think this is, like what I was saying is that for me, a concert, I never watch concert movies. And you could have a concert film by my favorite artist of all time. And I'd be like, nah, I don't know. I'm not going to really bother. So, but I love going to concerts.
Yeah, we could, but I don't think Jessica Simpson ever made a concert film.
She's got some good songs, actually. I'm not joking.
I've gone with Ashley Simpson. There.
I have some Ashley Simpson, also some decent stuff. So, not that
no
I would
more.
see either of them in concert. Anyway, that's not important. Well, we're going to come back and we're going to bring in our special guest. Jason, you want to tell us about who we're going to talk to?
Yeah, we're talking to Eric Gladstone. He is kind of a gadfly on the Las Vegas scene. Now, recently won some awards for his new public relations company, The Feast of Friends. But he was a music journalist. He was a DJ. He was in a band. And he's got an upcoming book with all of his interviews with people like Henry Rollins and I think people from Sonic Youth from the 90s called Anything But Nirvana. And it chronicles all his time on the rock scene. So we can ask him a little about that as well as his experience at the Stop Making Sense tour, where he saw them in Forest Hills, New York.
Oh, all right. So we'll come back in a moment and talk to Eric Gladstone.
All right, everybody. We are back here on Awesome Movie Year. We have a special guest. I was once asked by Brandon Powers, the owner of Evil Pie, if I am friends with Eric Gladstone. My answer was yes, but I also want to punch him in the face every day. He is a friend. He is a sparring partner. I almost had to defend his honor at an Iggy Pop concert that we saw together when a gentleman tried to fight him. But
I
Eric
don't recall the
Gladstone,
situation in quite the same way.
Eric Gladstone, you wrote about music for many years. You, I think, are a great DJ. I know you don't do it much anymore. And you were also in a band. And you have a book coming out about all of your interviews with famed musicians of the late 80s and 90s called Anything But Nirvana. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Hello, sir.
Thank you. Hello, sir. And yes, I describe you either in my mind or to other people as like a younger brother with everything that means, everything that entails.
Exactly. Me and you can fight each other, but if anyone else tries to jump in and like mess with you, then
Right.
I got your back. You know that.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
So, Eric, tell us about the book. Congratulations. I know you've been working on it for years.
Thank you, and I appreciate it. Yeah, it's been a project for about 5 years that's just gotten interrupted by life, basically. And what it is it's kind of a collection of my favorite stories / most interesting stories, I hope, from when I was writing about rock music, mostly alternative music, mostly in the 90s and then into the aughts just a little bit. So it's like more or less like a 15-year run. And I got to write about a lot of cool bands that have since become iconic. In many cases, they were the first stories on some of these bands in event on any level. In many cases, I got to be in places that ended up being kind of legendary. I was in the studio with Smashing Pumpkins when they made Siamese Dream, and that's kind of a huge story for lots of reasons. I was in the studio with Beck when he made Odelay. I wrote a big piece about the Beastie Boys that led to my working for them for a minute. Stuff like that is in the book, and then just some interviews that I'm really proud and happy with. And I think it's a nice kind of cross section of a lot of the bigger bands that came out of that era, except for Nirvana, which is kind of like, that's where the title comes from, Anything But Nirvana. It's kind of basically sort of making fun of myself, actually, as far as a writer, because Nirvana was the story that everyone wanted, and for whatever reason, I never got it. And by the time I could have gotten it, everyone had written it, so I didn't want it. Which, by the way, is a very, very 90s attitude,
Yes, I am picturing you in a flannel shirt, but it's wrapped around your waist right now. So, do you want to mention some of the magazines that you were writing for back then?
The most prominent magazines that I wrote for regularly were Rolling Stone and Spin and Alternative Press a lot. I also wrote for MTV Online in its earliest years. I wrote for SonicNet. I wrote for the online version of Wired magazine. I did a lot for Rhino.com when they were doing original content, including. So I also, and this is where there's crossover, I also started writing about alternative and underground film when that started coming up and becoming cool in the mid 90s also. So I sort of phased from just a music writer to writing about film a lot, and the crossover. And in the crossover, I wrote about a ton of documentaries and a ton of movies about music that I championed really early on. And in looking at my notes about this, we'll get to everything in a second, but a lot of them kind of come up as classics now, and they were just like, something a kid would send me on a VCR and say, hey, can you look at this and let me know if it's worth a review or whatever. So I'm really proud that I got to champion some stuff very early on. Paradise Lost is a good example of a non-music documentary that I championed really early. And another one that comes up is still a good movie called The Target Shoots First, which is actually about record clubs. That comes up as a something that holds up. And that was just, some crazy kid sent me this thing on VCR. I'll never forget it. VHS.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I got to write about a lot of stuff like that for a variety of magazines and early internet stuff. I did some very early music content for AOL as well. If any of you guys remember that.
I'm hearing scratchy dial-up right now. No, that's really cool. And you and I often we talk about these movies. I'll call you before we're kind of going to record just to get your thoughts, because
Right.
you were a lot of the time in the scene of when they came out. And this one, it was a kind of a perfect time to bring you on because of your background as a music writer, as a film writer and lover. And then also you told me you were at this Stop Making Sense tour. Tell us about that.
So I got my best friend in high school got tickets to see the Talking Heads on this tour at the Forest Hills Tennis Center, which I think has since been replaced, where they used to do the U.S. Open. I think they do it. They rebuilt it, but at the time it was not a common place to see a concert, but when it did, it was great, because it's kind of like this. It was this square, tennis arena. And yeah, we went to see Talking Heads there. We really didn't necessarily have an idea of what the tour was going to look like. I can't remember what album that was off of. It was like their fourth album, I think.
Speaking in Tongues.
Speaking in Tongues. So it was like they were just starting to get popular. MTV was just starting to pay attention to them, and we didn't really have a sense of what the show was going to look like. I think we kind of knew Bernie Worrell was involved, which felt like very left field, because Bernie Worrell was this guy from P-Funk and a bunch of different kind of weird jazz funk things. And it was like, how does this fit in with the Talking Heads? Musically, sure, but it was definitely like, it was a little unexpected. So went to see the show, and the show was, I mean, I have to say, and I later interviewed Jonathan Demme for another movie that he did. He did another rock movie called Storefront Hitchcock about Robin Hitchcock, and I got to interview him for that. And I think we talked a little about this, but I don't remember. We definitely compared the two. But he really did a great job in this film, in my opinion, of really documenting the show as it was. And it's so choreographed, and it's so, and the film is cut so well, I think part of your brain goes, oh, this must have been kind of like staged, or this must have been coordinated somehow for it to work on film, which is definitely true of other rock, quote unquote, documentaries. But my recollection of the concert is pretty much like, that's it. They nailed it. That's really how well coordinated the concert was. It was a really great show. And you see, I think in retrospect, how influential that was. I mean, when you look at like the 1975 or Florence and the Machine or bands like that and how they do their staging now, it's completely influenced by that tour. And it's really interesting to see that years afterwards. I don't, yeah, it's incredible how I think influential that tour and the staging was. No one was really doing it like that.
Was this your first time seeing the Talking Heads?
I think it's the only time I saw them, actually. Once I saw that show, I was like, well, they're never gonna top that. I mean, that's how there's a few bands like that in my life where I've just like, I saw them and it was so good. I'm less like, I'm not going again because like it's gonna ruin that memory. And that's probably one of them.
And Eric, did you go see the movie then when it first came out?
I think I'm pretty sure I saw it when it came out, although it's possible that I took a while because I probably thought, I used to have a bit of a snotty attitude in the 80s. I loosened up a little bit in the 90s, but in the 80s, I was kind of like, I saw it. I saw the tour. Why do I need to go see the movie of what I already saw? So I'm not sure that I saw it straight out, but I probably did.
So let me ask you two questions, Eric. Look, we're talking about 84, so 30 years ago, 35 years ago now. Do you have any highlights etched in your head from this? Do you remember anything that really stood out to you beyond the staging?
Well, the suit thing and what he did with it was awesome. The way that they incorporated the rhythms of the music into the staging and the pacing was just really incredible. I mean, I do recall that they did take breathers, in between songs, but it still felt like it was just like it went at you. I remember the trick with the lamps, that's etched in my memory really well. And the fact that Bernie was featured so prominently and such a spotlight and yet a member of the band was really cool. It was just, you really saw, because again, this was in the era before there were Jumbotron screens at concerts, which is hard, I think, probably for people in the modern era to even imagine. It's like, and when I go to concerts now, I really try not to look at the Jumbotron the whole time, which is hard, because it obviously brings you that much closer. But you want to look at the actual people doing the actual stuff. Well, back then, that's all you could look at, and hopefully you were close enough to see what was going on. We actually were. We had really kind of perfect seats. But I do recall the pacing of the show was really good and the visual of the show was really good. And it was so visually ahead of so much. People would just kind of have a static background. At best, concerts would have one big banner behind them and it wasn't going to change, obviously. Now you've got incredible visuals that you can do. So the cleanness and the visual theatrical approach to what they were doing, and yet it was just enough that it served the music and didn't try and distract you from it, if that makes sense.
Eric, you and I talked before. You said there was about 5,000 at venues like this. They were playing about 5,000 seats.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Well, what I wonder is that, and you say that you had pretty good seats, but to me, watching the movie, it seemed like there was so much detail that the movie captures by being up close and on stage with the performers, that if you were even a little far back in the audience, you wouldn't notice. Having been there in person and then seen the movie, were there things that you saw in the movie that you missed when you were there in person?
I'm sure, and I haven't looked at the movie recently, so there's nothing particular that I can point out. But yeah, of course, I'm sure there's a few things, but they were not. I think, and the point I'm making about the movie is they weren't doing the staging to make the movie. So even though the movie probably picked up things that not a lot of people saw, it wasn't because they were doing things that only the cameras could see, if that makes sense. They were definitely performing for the audience. So their moves were very big and bold and theatrical, or at least as much as they wanted it to be. Tina's a really active bass player, for example, and Byrne was doing his thing, and I think he made that suit because it would exaggerate his movements, to a huge audience. And that's exactly what it did,
And let me ask you a question, because you brought up Bernie Worrell a few times, and he's so spotlighted on this. And one
Yeah.
of the critiques that I had is that I don't see any interplay between Byrne and the other band members, like, Franz Harrison or Tina, because we know they've always had friction, and now they basically don't speak. Did you
Right.
notice that, or did we miss something there? Were they? I mean, they clearly enjoyed performing, but did they enjoy each other?
My recollection of the time was that they were not a super like high five each other band ever, even with or without him. They kind of went on stage and they played the music and they interacted through the music. They weren't like the type of, you know, the guitarist and the bassist leaning over and telling jokes to each other, or like going back to back or all that Spinal Taps type stuff. I don't think they ever did any stuff like that. And in fact, I seem to remember, Chris and Tina being married. It's like you never got any vibe of that at all on stage. It's not like they threw each other kisses or anything. You know what I mean? Like you didn't get any of that on stage from them. They just kind of played their music. David did most of the interaction with the audience, and they just kind of did their thing. So I don't think that was specific to Bernie's interaction with them. Although having seen Bernie with P-Funk also later on, Bernie just kind of does this thing, and it's Bernie's a little bit, as a musician, he was a little bit in his own vibe, and it's like, I hear you, but I'm doing my thing, and you can either ride my train or not, but I'm going where I want to go. That's kind of how Bernie was as a musician. So I think they just kind of made it work. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Eric, thank you for your insights and for joining us. What do you want? We talked about your book, but what else do you want to plug? Where can people find your work?
Oh, well, so I mean, my book is, a throwback to a previous career. Now I represent restaurants for marketing and social media and PR. So I'm a totally different world. If you care, you can go to thefeastoffriends.com. That's my company now. But yeah, I just appreciate you being on. It's a great podcast. It's a lot of fun. Seeing you guys go through a lot of the films and a lot of the eras when I was writing about film and studying film. I still want to see you guys go back and do some stuff on silent film, because I'm really into that world.
We'll get there. Hey, Eric, thanks again. And people can find your book coming out on Amazon. Is that correct?
It is going to be available for pre-sale on Amazon within the next few weeks, hoping to have it available by Christmas. Fingers crossed, but yeah, we're very close, and it'll definitely be available on pre-sale. Anything But Nirvana. Thanks for the plug, guys. Appreciate you.
You got it, and we look forward to seeing you in a giant suit coming up soon.
Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1984, we've been talking about our documentary pick, the Talking Heads concert film Stop Making Sense. And we just got some insights from Eric Gladstone, who was there in person, which of course we were not, and maybe has a different, if not better, appreciation of this whole thing, having seen it from that perspective.
I think one thing, Josh, that he did say, and it leads in perfectly to this legacy segment, is how influential this has been on staging and the look of live shows, and also the look of a lot of other concert pieces.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's maybe one of the reasons that it doesn't impress us as much now is because we're used to concert films and we're used to these kind of elaborate stagings of concert tours and of concert performances where the artists are thinking about where the artistry is not just in the music, but is also in the presentation of the music, and the fact that David Byrne put so much thought and so much effort into how this whole concert is being presented. I mean, that's something that I think you see from many, many, many artists now, and maybe you didn't see as much back then. So it doesn't strike us as quite as revolutionary.
Right. And David Byrne is having a moment right now. America has fallen back in love with him, if they ever fell out of love with him. American Utopia was a huge live touring show. And now, was a huge hit on Broadway before the pandemic hit, and highly recommend it. Spike Lee is also, he directed it, takes a lot of visual risks as he does a lot lately in his films. It's a really good piece. Some of the same songs like This Must Be the Place, Burning Down the House, Once in a Lifetime, but also some newer songs and a really powerful cover of Janelle Monáe's song in there. So it's worth checking out, American Utopia.
Yeah, I have not seen that, but it certainly is one of the more acclaimed films of the year. And I think, again, much like Stop Making Sense, was something that film fans and film critics embraced, not just music fans or not just people who are into the Talking Heads. I think that seems to have become the case for American Utopia as well. And it's interesting to me that on the one hand, there's hundreds of concert films released all the time now. I mean, any artist goes on tour and they make a quote movie of it, or some sort of home video document that fans can purchase or can stream so that they can watch it. But very few of these are considered sort of art or cinema on their own, the way that Stop Making Sense was. And I was trying to think of which concert films like that sort of fall into that category recently. And the only thing that came to mind was the Beyonce concert film Homecoming, which I haven't seen, but I got a lot of really, really great reviews from film critics. And I don't know, Jason, if you can think of any others like that.
No, you make a good point, because like we said, this is not a music documentary, like kind of like chronicling the history of a band and the relationships. And it's not an album documentary, like kind of chronicling the inspiration and then playing it. You're talking about a very straightforward performance of a concert. I obviously I love Springsteen ones. That's a personal choice, but I think that him and Thom Zimny have such a working relationship that they understand the language of how he wants it to be shot. But recently, nothing has jumped out. I know I mentioned The Last Waltz. To me, that's the height of someone being able to capture the piece, and the performance, and spotlight each member cinematically. But again, he does these little interviews in between that are like palate cleansers, so it kind of leads you from segment to segment. So it's really tough genre to really crack, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough to crack in the sense that it's tough to make something that people will look at as a film, as an achievement in film, as opposed to just here's a concert that happened and that this is being made for fans of this particular artist. I think technologically it's easier than ever to do something like that, but it's harder to create something that makes that wider impact as a piece of film.
Even in a more recent sense, the Aretha Franklin one, right? That did make an impact, but that's actually a concert film from 73 or something like that, right? So
that Amazing Grace.
Yeah.
There was a pretty interesting one last year from Depeche Mode, Spirits in the Forest, which I didn't love necessarily, but it did take a unique approach in that the main story was being told by 4 fans, and it was interviews with these 4 specific fans that they followed through their life and how Depeche Mode has touched their life. And you really only get little bits and pieces of concert footage throughout, which really kind of takes like the exact opposite approach in a way.
Yeah. Right. That's not really a concert doc, then that's the opposite, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, that's kind of what it was sold as, though.
That's cool. So.
And I mean, and I think that points to like the way that you make something like this into sort of a quote, a movie that people view that way is to have other stuff in it. Right. I mean, there was a movie, Metallica made a movie a few years ago that I actually haven't seen, even though I'm a big Metallica fan, because like I said, I tend not to go to concert films, but a movie called Through the Never, which was a combination of a Metallica concert performance. And then it had like a narrative element where Dane DeHaan, the actor, is in it and he plays like a Metallica roadie and he has to go on some kind of mission. And again, they add this extra stuff in there in order to get it to be kind of thought of as quote, a movie that was released in a regular theatrical release and not just as a one-time event. And it didn't, like, I think it was a flop. I don't think anybody went to see it as a movie. And again, as a Metallica fan, I haven't even seen it, but I think it maybe is necessary to do something like that in order to sell this as more than just like a home video souvenir.
Yeah, and one other dimension, and it's one I haven't seen, but I should watch because I like the group too, was the Beastie Boys one, the We Shot This Shit, that they had their fans shoot everything and then they just kind of put it together as like, I'm not going to say a found footage movie, but like a chronicling from the fans' point of view of the show, right?
Right. I think it's called Awesome. I fucking shot that. It has a different swear word in the title than the one that you used.
I was close.
Yes, you were. And Jonathan Demme himself, I mean, this movie was so successful that he had kind of a side career. I mean, he was a very successful narrative film director, but he had this ongoing career as a documentary filmmaker, including making a number of concert documentaries for artists, including Robin Hitchcock, which that film that Eric Gladstone mentioned, Storefront Hitchcock. Yeah, he made a couple movies with Neil Young. And actually the final feature film that he directed before he passed away was a Justin Timberlake concert documentary that's on Netflix that I want to say did get some notice as sort of a piece of cinema, maybe not to the level of that Beyonce movie, but I did see it kind of covered and reviewed beyond just the music press. So that was something that Jonathan Demme held onto throughout his career.
Yeah, well, Demme made 15 documentaries overall and produced more. So that is interesting. Obviously, we all know the height of his success was Silence of the Lambs, which just won everything. But, Josh, going back to American Utopia, I think those type of shows sometimes get more credit as, they kind of break through as musical and cinematic pieces, because I'm thinking of Springsteen on Broadway, which also got that, and even Hamilton in a way this year, which is different, kind of broke through.
Yeah, I was thinking of Hamilton as I was watching this and the idea of like what makes this a big piece of cinema, because Hamilton, the sort of quote movie of Hamilton that you can watch on Disney Plus, was touted as this huge event, was initially intended to be a big theatrical release, and Disney paid like $75 million for the rights to it. And you have to wonder, like, is that just because Hamilton as a stage show was such a sensation, or is there something there as a movie in that piece? And I don't know. I mean, having watched it, and Jason, I think you watched it too, even if you like, regardless of what you think of Hamilton as a stage production, I don't really think there's anything in that as a movie that it's just a document of the stage production.
I think it's documented well is the thing. It's such a brilliant show, and this one kind of utilizes every shot is kind of thought out, in the same way that we're talking about here, where it's there are reasons for each shot, and they're showing you swooping angles or close-ups based on whatever's going on. I loved Hamilton.
Yeah. I mean, again, I'm not saying I thought it was fine, but regardless of the quality of the stage play, I felt like there were very few moments in there where I could think about, like in Stop Making Sense, what is the director choosing to do here from a cinematic standpoint, where you're talking about like close-ups or moving the camera in certain ways. And Hamilton, that is something where they did shoot parts of it without the audience, that they went back and shot certain numbers on the stage without the audience there so that they could get certain angles. But I don't know. I mean, we don't need to spend this much time on Hamilton. that is kind of the biggest, that was such a big deal that it came out. And I didn't really understand the hype about it sort of as a movie.
So Josh, let's talk a little about the other talking heads, because Chris Franz right now has a book out, Remain in Love, which is about his life with Tina Weymouth and their kind of work together in the Talking Heads and Tom Tom Club. Jerry Harrison went on to produce a lot of bands, including No Doubt, Kenny Wayne Shepherd, General Public, Violent Femmes, and Tina Weymouth, kind of a legend there. So that's what those three are up to. But David Byrne really, really in the spotlight now.
Right. I mean, he's clearly the one who went on to have the most successful career, which is not surprising as the front man for that. And I'm not, as I've said multiple times, I'm not necessarily a fan, but I think it's interesting that the Talking Heads have to be one of the few bands that were huge, in the 80s and in the early 90s that broke up and then have just stayed broken up. They performed together when they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but they've never done a reunion tour. They've never done a reunion album. They've resisted, and they've kind of held out on all that bad blood between them for the last 30 years or whatever. So I don't know if is that admirable or is it sad?
I think they would get back together if David Byrne wanted to get back together with them. But his career has been so varied. He's got an Oscar, for his work on the soundtrack of The Last Emperor. and he's done everything from classical pieces to kind of this interesting amalgamation of music and a color guard situation, which is called Contemporary Color, with 10 musical acts and 10 color guards groups. And Josh, you informed me of True Stories, which I watched. The David Byrne directed film from, I think, 1986.
Yes.
And features 9 or 10, I think 9 new Talking Head songs, and kind of led into that. And I really liked it. I really, really liked it. It's so strange. And it's all about this little town in Texas. And John Goodman is one of the stars of it, and just kind of the townsfolk, and David Byrne narrates it. And there's some really weird humor in there. Stephen Tobolowsky is one of the co-writers, Ned Ryerson, of course, from Groundhog Day. It's really fun. It's so weird. I could see how people hate it, but I really liked it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I'm glad you watched it, though, because it did seem like something that is a clear sort of progression from this. And one of the reasons that movie, and as you kind of allude to, it was a big flop. But one of the reasons that it was made is something that has come up a lot on some recent episodes that we've had, which is that Stop Making Sense was such a huge success that David Byrne was able to kind of get a blank check to say, hey, look at what I've just done here that people love. I want to do this weird project. And even though he had never directed a film before and has never directed a film since, he was given the freedom to do what he wanted with that movie.
Well, he should direct a movie because it's beautiful, like the colors and like the kind of dance sequences. And there's some really memorable stuff like the fashion show. And it's awesome. Like, it's a really good movie. I recommend it.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out.
It's super weird.
Well, I like that. I'm okay with that. I did want to circle back just briefly to Jonathan Demme, because in addition to making narrative films and making concert documentaries, he in a couple of instances he kind of integrated that. I love Rachel Getting Married, for example, which takes place at a wedding, and there's a lot of musical performance from the wedding band where he just lets that stuff play out. And then the last narrative film that he directed, Ricky and the Flash, with Meryl Streep, where she's kind of this aging rock star, which I was not a fan of, but has built kind of a cult following. And that is another one where he really draws on his experience making concert films. So I just think it's interesting that he's able to put those two things together.
That is interesting. I had 2 other things I really wanted to bring up quickly. One is, like you said, this was a huge movie, made $5.1 million off of a $1.2 million budget that the Talking Heads raised. And one of the producers of it was Gary Goetzman, who we have discussed in That Thing You Do. He was Tom Hanks' producing partner, and he's produced a lot of musical acts like the Staples Singer and Natalie Cole. He worked with Demme on Silence of the Lambs in Philadelphia. And of course, like we said, he's Tom Hanks' producing partner. So he's done everything from Polar Express to My Big Fat Greek Wedding to Greyhound and News of the World coming out now, Master of Air. And the last thing, Josh, I wanted to talk about is David Byrne's renaissance as a comedy player, where he has been in, he and John Mulaney seem to collaborate a lot. He's really funny in the Sack Lunch Bunch, where he sings Pay Attention with a child performer named Lexi Perkle. And he also was in a sketch on SNL with Mulaney. And he also did David Byrne's Giant Suit Emporium as a fake ad on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. So those are some interesting pieces there.
And of course, speaking of John Mulaney, he is one of the collaborators on Documentary Now, which is a great series that parodies documentaries. Fred Armisen and Seth Meyers and Bill Hader, who are the other people behind that show, and they have an episode that parodies Stop Making Sense. And as is the case, I think with every episode of that show, it's a parody, but it's also clearly a very affectionate tribute. So I would recommend every episode of that show, really, but they also did bring in Stop Making Sense, and I'm sure David Byrne appreciated it.
Yeah, that one's called Final Transmission.
There you go. So that is Stop Making Sense, and that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can follow us on social media.
Yes, you can. We are at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter. I'm Jason Harris Comedy on Facebook and Instagram, J Harris Comedy on Twitter. Go for jason.com. Not good at anything, including being a website.
I am at joshbellhateseverything.com, which may have some content on it soon. We'll see. At Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook and at Signal Bleed on Twitter. And you can check out our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
You can check us out wherever you listen to podcasts and follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. And don't forget about our Patreon, produced by David Rosen, where you'll find bonus content from Awesome Movie Year, Piecing It Together, from my music career. I got a bunch of bonus music coming out soon on there, as well as album length commentaries. So check that out as well.
Yeah, sign up, please. And thanks again to our guest, Eric Gladstone. His book, what is it called, Jason? Anything But
Nirvana.
There you go. Will be available on Amazon very soon. So, Jason, what is in our next episode?
Well, Josh, I am nothing if not a gentleman. And as a gentleman, I shall defer to you because it's your pick of the season.
It is my pick, and it's maybe the most esoteric pick I've given yet on Awesome Movie Year. It is Thom Eberhardt's cult sci-fi teen comedy thing, Night of the Comet. So I'm apprehensive but excited to talk about that. Tune in next time for Night of the Comet, and thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.